We are going to start the second panel of the day, and that's our Regional Student Outcomes panel, What Works for Regional Student Outcomes? And as the panelists start making their way to the stage, I'll introduce our moderator. Our moderator today is Dr. Kylie Austin. Our original moderator, the Honorable Fiona Nash, is unwell and unable to make it today, so she sends her apologies. But Kylie, who was a panelist, has agreed to kindly step up and wear the dual hat of moderator and panelist. So Kylie is a very experienced higher education leader and has worked extensively in student experience-focused roles. She has qualifications in education, mental health in education settings, and research qualifications in collaborative partnerships, equity, and student success in higher education settings. She's currently the Director of Student Life at Edith Cowan University and also the current President of EFIA, Equity Practitioners in Higher Education Australasia, and she's engaged in a number of national research projects and collaborative networks focused on the student experience and student equity. In addition to this, Kylie has led large teams and is passionate about supporting teams to establish person-centered and collaborative cultures. Welcome to the panel, and I'll let Kylie take over from here.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you so much for having us this afternoon. I'm joined by some very esteemed colleagues on stage today. So on stage today, I'm joined by Chris Moran, the Vice-Chancellor and CEO of the University of New England. So welcome, thank you. We're also joined by Alec Webb. Alec is the Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Universities Network. It's great to have you here today, Alec. And we've also got Natalie Nelmes joining us, who's the Director of the Geraldton Universities Centre in WA, the first non-for-profit regional university centre in Australia. So great to have you, Natalie. And probably the most important person on stage today is Tim Connolly, a student at Taree, the Taree Study Hub as well, University Centre as well. Tim's studying a Masters in Social Change and Development from the University of Newcastle, and we're really excited to have the student voice as part of the session today. So thank you so much for joining us, Tim. So today, everyone, we're going to be talking about what works in terms of regional student outcomes in the higher education sector. What we've seen in terms of regional student outcomes is that regional, rural and remote students continue to be underrepresented in Australia and have been so since the Fair Chance for All in 1990. As at 2023, regional, rural and remote students make up about 20% of Australian undergraduate student commencements, despite regional, rural and remote people representing 27% of the Australian population. So we are still not reaching population parity for regional, rural and remote students. The Accord highlighted the need to reach population parity by 2050, but as a progressive outcome to reach 24% by 2035. And I think one of the what we're really interested to hear from the panel today is that whilst those statistics seem quite challenging for regional, rural, and remote communities, there's actually some really amazing work happening across the sector in supporting regional, rural and remote students to access higher education. And so we're really here to hear from some key experts today around what works for regional student participation in higher ed. So I think each of our panellists are kind of going to give a bit of a 7-minute overview from their individual perspectives around what works. And so Chris, I think I'm going to get you to kick us off if that's okay in terms of what works.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Very nice to be here, and thank you to ACSES for the opportunity to speak. Can I start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here and pay respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And it's only the second time in my career I've had a welcome to country that's been given by someone who understands the delineation of groups of people on the basis of the topography and the natural environment. We have an elder in our community, an Anawan man, who this is his standard welcome to country, is an education. And if he had been in the room today, he's quite a remarkable man because he can name the people from almost any English state, any English town or region in Australia, he can name the local people there. And I've seen him do this in audiences multiple times. Where we live is the gorge country separates the highlands, who are the snow people, the Anawan people and the Gumbunja people. And then as you move down the gorge country, you come down into the coastal plain where the coastal people live, and then you go down the mountains on the other side and you come to the mighty Kamilaroi Nation. Many of you will know that's the next big nation from the nation further to the south that many of you will be aware of out from Canberra. And then the subgroups really, again, really quite specifically divided by the topography, the rivers, and the availability of certain food types at certain times of the year. And I reflected just last week we had, about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, we had a massive snow event in Armidale. Very unusual to have a really big snow event in Armidale. So we had like 30 centimetres of snow in a day. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Wonderland turned into Armageddon, where the weight of snow on the trees exceeded the sheer stress of the branches of trees, and thousands of tree branches fell in a matter of 15 minutes to an hour across the region. It was a phenomenon that I'd never even heard of, let alone experienced. But then I did stop and pause and thought, that'll be a well-known phenomenon in that place, that every 10, 20 or 30 years this event occurs where the eucalypts can't bear the weight. And so I thought it was an interesting reflection on how we lose knowledge. Now, I don't know what we would have done. I went out there and poked the deciduous trees for a while to get the snow to fall out, so the beautiful old deciduous trees around my garden didn't die, but I didn't go poking any massive eucalyptus trees. I wanted to talk a little bit about a concept as part of acknowledgement on something that is becoming, I think, increasingly important to people in our region, and I think increasingly an issue for us to think about in terms of who regional people are. And this is the concept of the right to learn on country. This is the concept that you don't need to be displaced. We heard wonderful stories from 2 students this morning. There was a lot of displacement behind those stories. You don't constrain anyone from going and having those experiences. But if you're kind of forced into those experiences by having to leave country because the higher education system in our country that we call Australia doesn't disperse knowledge and doesn't respect local knowledge, then you are kind of forcing that issue. You're either offering people the opportunity to come close or closer to their own country, so you'd be in places like James Cook or University of New England, Charles Sturt, places that are in the more rural areas where there are large concentrations. The town of Armidale has an Aboriginal population of around 12%, and it increases as you move west and north from Armidale. So we've been working and thinking hard about the concept of the right to learn on country and the concern over whether a stolen generation might be replaced by a purchased generation. Who are the young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are qualifying for access to university education in our big cities, and on what basis is that selection occurring, and what is the implication for the communities that they leave behind? So we're working with the elders. This is an idea from the elders in our area to start to think about what they call a loose network of elders across a very large region, and then a very tight group of mentors of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who hold tertiary education qualifications, who may be prepared to formally enter into a mentoring network that then connects to children. Because really the issue we've got is that we're trying to influence Year 12 leavers of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We've already dropped to single-digit percentages. But if you think of the children when they're in grade 5 or grade 6, it's a little bit like the demographics of some of our gender issues in our universities. We're probably at about a balance when they're in grade 5, grade 6, remarkable young people that are really no differentiated in their school performance. By the time we get to Year 12, we're in single digits. So our view is that if the university can help those mentors connect to those families and the children in those areas, then if you like, normalising the concept of university comes through. If you can see it, you can be it. But the university's role there is to be the catalyst to help bring a network of people together. This is a very, very big region I'm talking about, so there are many groups, so there's by no means some kind of homogeneous approach will work. But that's just one idea of how individual dreams might connect to community outcomes. And also there's a theme that I'll build a little bit on here, which is respect for the knowledge that the people hold who don't hold tertiary education degrees. I think that's a concept for us to be far more respectful of what people know, not just to say as an acknowledgement of country that you respect the elders and knowledge holders of those places, but there are a lot of other people out there as well. I just wanted to point out, I have to do this because it's part of my job description, so just pick up your phones and have a look at your email for the next 3 minutes. There is a university that was formed in this country in 1938. It separated from the University of Sydney in 1954 with great pleasure. That university, well, they tell me, I wasn't there, right? I tell you, it's part of my job description. It came on the thing, you must do this whenever you're in a public place. The point that is really important is that there was a marker in the community of the New England Northwest in 1892 in the history that stated that a university needed to be established, and it needed to be established as a university for education for all. 1892. It finally came into being, as I say, in 1938, became a university in 1954 on the same basis of education for all. The early cohorts in the university were scholarshiped in at least double or quadruple the rates until the end of the war, where there was war veterans came back and were scholarshiped into the large universities. So this is a time when the University of Queensland had about 1,500 students, so not a lot of students. Cast your mind back there, or think back, we had our historian up here earlier. What were the universities in Australia at the time that are University of Access for All? What were those universities? University of Western Australia, University of Adelaide, University of Melbourne, University of Tasmania, University of Sydney, University of Queensland. Universities for the children of elite wealthy people. There was only one other university in the whole country for everybody else in Australia. It was the University of New England, and they flooded into it. And they flooded into it because the University of New England decided that they would do distance education. No internet, not even photocopiers. They'd do it by post, and they figured it out. So why would I go through all this? The point of going through all this is that when people talk about a differentiated sector, one of the things that we need to look much more closely at is how we are already differentiated, and then figure out what the priorities of the country are, and then use the differentiation we have in our system to meet those priorities. I think our students spoke a bit openly this morning once or twice. Let me speak openly. I think it's an absolute folly to scale out the Geo8 universities in this country to try to take the equity cohorts we need for 2050. We don't need to do it that way. I think we said, Harleen Haynes said she had 50% of adult learners. There's 70% equity cohort in Curtin University. There's 65% equity cohort in the University of New England. There's 18% in the University of New South Wales, and there's 20% in the University of Sydney. The other Geo8s don't publish their information on the website, so you don't know. Let's work where we're strong. We have very strong universities in this country, and we can build out and meet these numbers without having to reform the Geo8. I think Australia should have high-ranking, proud universities that are research-focused, and I think if they fall down in their research focus, they should answer to Australia for that. We shouldn't be trying to convert every university into every other university whilst having the conversation about differentiation. I've got a couple of other points here, but I've probably spoken for 7 minutes already, but I want to touch very quickly on a concept, another concept that we're working hard on, that we call the lost learners. So we say, well, what's the school leaver rate of regional and rural students going to university? There's a much bigger question, which is what's the cohort of people who could have gone to university that didn't go to university, and then multiply that by the number of years that they've been moving into the economy, let's say 15 years. Because if you think of the distribution of school leaver marks, not even to think of the very able people who were at the lower end of the distribution, if you look at the next part of the distribution of those who didn't go to university at first. By the way, only 10% of students at UNE have an ATAR. They come through from life. Then you've got a huge group of people who are sitting in the economy who are reaching dead ends after about 10 or 15 years of work. about the time their families are growing, about the time they're looking for changes of career, about the time that they're looking for more life opportunities. There's a wonderful, important group of people out there, and the way that we're facing those people to look at what success looks like here is to reverse the logic of enabling. The logic of enabling, I'm afraid, is a big deficit statement. There's something wrong with you, we'll fix the thing that's wrong with you, and then we might let you into university if you do it, if you get there. So we're introducing the concept of curiosity. Are you curious about music? Are you curious about online gaming? Are you curious about sport? So curiosity courses, very low friction to enter, very low friction. Those horrendous stories that our students told us, if you know nothing about university, imagine the bureaucracy of having to fill in the form, find the information, know whether you've clicked the right buttons. What about no friction entry? The minimum amount of information so that you know the same human is only coming to you once. Low friction, high respect. Why shouldn't we value? Why shouldn't the first thing that a curiosity course do is say, what do you know? What are you curious about? And reward that. And then progress people through to the point where you're saying to them, you're learning, you're using this learning. We'd like to let you know these university options are becoming available to you as you progress through here. Change the logic. There is nobody in our community who has the slightest curiosity about subjects who don't know things already. Think of the young sports people. There's an exponential function, isn't there? That is the people who fall out of the prospect of being an Olympian or a professional sports person. We're getting better at looking after the ones who keep progressing, but not the ones who don't. And they've just spent all their school years under heavy discipline of training, nutrition, sports, strategy, all these things that they've been learning about. But if they don't pass an HSC or a high school leaving mark, we tell them they're kind of dumb and they need to be enabled. We could spin that around. There's a lot more to be said about that. I'll leave it there and pass on to the next person. There's lots of things we can be doing.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, some really great insights that we'll draw together, and I might come back and ask you a few questions on a little bit later, if that's okay. But over to Natalie to kind of share from a regional kind of university centre perspective, what works for regional students.
Thank you. I thought I'd start with just a couple of quotes from our students, just to try and keep it real. So the choice to study at Geraldton University Centre was a relatively easy decision to make. Being able to stay locally with the support of family and friends was a no-brainer. Sometimes it's actually pretty simple. Or this, GUC fosters community spirit, where we have a chat, lunch dates or late night clarification of assessments, supporting each other throughout the years. Perhaps this is the key to our high achievement. Once again, pretty simple. Family and friends, plenty of support, community spirit, achievement. Delivering outcomes for regional students is really what the Regional University Centre or the Regional University Study Hub program, the RUSH program, is all about. And at Geraldton University Centre, as Kylie pointed out, we pioneered this community-based model of support right back in 2002. So we've been making a difference to our community and to the regional students in our community since then. So hopefully I've got a few insights to be able to share with you this afternoon. Of course, since 2018, we've had the federally funded RUSH program. And so if you are new to this space, I don't like to assume that there's always the knowledge. We're all community-driven centres. Some of us are larger, like us at Geraldton University Centre over in WA, and some are a bit smaller. A lot of you in New South Wales might be familiar with the country university centres. We've got centres from Arnhem Land down to Tassie and everywhere in between. So what unites us is that we are all working at a community level to support local students to be able to study in their region and succeed in doing that. Now, we can't be everywhere, of course, but there's 70 or so of us now, so we are doing our bit to try and ease that burden of isolation, because it's really hard to do things on your own. Really, really hard. GUC is proof that it works. So because we have been at this for over 20 years now, we've had more than 600 graduates come through the courses that they've been studying at Geraldton University Centre. 6% of our graduates have been from our Aboriginal students. So place and support in that place really matters. We've also produced 5 faculty or school medalists. So that's, you know, the top student across the country from our university partners, not just studying at GUC. So it just shows that quality local support from quality online programs does and can and does breed success in regional students. And these could be students that otherwise weren't given the opportunity. So what a complete travesty that would be to not harness the talents of those people. So the quality and success comes off the back of the supported model at GUC. We work in partnership with Central Queensland University, the University of Southern Queensland and Curtin, and lots of our partners are represented here in the room today. What we're doing is augmenting our partners' online courses with providing face-to-face tuition, labs and intensives, facilitated study groups, and then through our own connections and partnerships in our region, sourcing and supervising local practical placements for the courses that need them. Now, not all of the rushes work like this. In fact, only quite a small number of us do, but it's really important that where the study hubs are based in larger centres, and Geraldton's a centre of 40,000 people, for instance, that the Rush program continues to value and support funding mechanisms so this type of academically supported course delivery can continue. It's absolutely vital in states like South Australia and Western Australia, where we do not have regional universities as such. So it's really, really important. We could actually do more if we had more accessible courses for our regional students within our state. It's the one thing that I think is holding us back in regional WA. That online plus residential school model that has been a feature from East Coast universities with that mission to be supporting regional students really isn't a thing in WA. And while we can and do have students going over to do res schools in Queensland, for instance, it's really only the most motivated that take up that opportunity, because you're talking about going 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times sometimes, depending on what it is, what kind of degree that you want to do. And it's not practical. It's costly, it takes time, you know, both in the actual time it takes to physically get there. The logistics are really difficult, moving from regional WA to regional Queensland or New South Wales, wherever that might be. It's costly. There's no government support for it, so the students have to rely on philanthropy if they're going to be doing that. I'm concerned about how this is going to get any better in a state like WA, particularly given, you know, now that there won't even be the incentive of regional loading, because that will be for regional institutions, and I'm fully supportive of regional institutions being able to be better supported to do what they do, because they do absolutely marvellous things. But it's hard to know where the incentive will be for a metropolitan-based university in WA or South Australia to really be going to create programs that will be more accessible for regional students. We currently receive Commonwealth supported places under the Regional University Study Hub program to allocate to our partners, and these do provide some incentive to enter into those academically supported partnerships, but we are about to be consulted with around the continuance of those in 2027. Now, I've been talking to some of my counterparts that are running similar-ish course models to us, and as I said, there's only a few of us that are doing it, and we all know how important those incentives, those Commonwealth supported places have been, so we will be advocating strongly for those so that we can continue to meet the course needs of our communities and industries. But of course you can't build a cohort for every type of course in a small regional town, so GUC, like all study hubs, provides supports and facilities for students that are studying any online course from any university throughout Australia. And when you're there and listening to where a student might be getting stuck, you can direct them to those really excellent range of services that universities have invested in for students. But the piece often is that the students don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how to access them. So we can provide that timely intervention, and to be able to say to people, well, you know, this is how you can go about getting yourself a learning access plan, or you can book in for a counselling session, this is how you can do it. So to actually be able to have people to provide that on the ground, where that rapport, and where students are already perhaps a bit more comfortable to open up about their life and what might be going on, really does help that retention piece. The widening participation part of things is also a really key thing that we're able to expand upon. I do note that it's kind of assumed within our funding that we will do the aspiration raising and capability raising stuff. We don't actually get specific funding through the Rush program to do that. We've had a really successful partnership with Curtin to allow us to do a bit more in the space. And we're ideally placed to do the work because we're there, we know the community, we've already got the school contacts. So this year alone, you know, we've been able to reach out to more than 400 students from years 7 to 12 in our 5 local high schools. You know, really, that it is a no-brainer, but it's important that is funded to happen. And it means that we can also really work with Aboriginal students in established school engagement programs to deliver bespoke aspiration-raising activities. We actually have a different model happening in our state. In WA, there's a lot of, sorry, I'm going to use the word enabling. Maybe I can use bridging. Maybe I'll use curiosity. I'll start picking up your term.
You're going to say either.
Well, we have a lot of that as well. But we have a lot of students now completing enabling programs within school as opposed to doing ATAR. So we actually run Curtin's Uni Ready in Schools program for the Year 12 students from our public schools. They come to us 1 day a week, and we provide the tuition that backs up the online content that they're getting through that program. We're into our 3rd cohort, and I've just had the parent night for the 4th cohort. So we're getting about 15 to 17 students that would otherwise have been dropping out of their ATAR load throughout Year 11, actually managing to achieve university entrance by the time they finish school, which is great. And even better, because they come to us, they're starting their transition to what university might be like when they're still at school, and the relationships that they're forming with our team are lasting well beyond the time that they have their last class with us, which has been a really added bonus, I think, of doing it this way. So in case you're not convinced yet that Rush is a really good policy, I thought I'd share this stat with you from our 2025 student survey, seeing as I was doing the stats on the plane on the way over. 81% of students at GUC said that their decision to study at university was greatly affected by being able to study locally with us. 81%. I think that's a pretty compelling stat. I'm probably on my 7 minutes too, am I? Oh. I've got a couple of just other little points that I just thought I'm just going to make because there are bugbears that drive me mad. We're talking about equity, and often we don't keep this real enough. So whether it's regional students or equity students more generally, there's just a few things that I've noticed that I just think, really, we should be doing this. We need to make it free to apply. Somewhere along the line with all our central bodies that we make students apply through, the cost to put in your application for university is like, $100 or more. If you haven't got $100, you haven't got $100. So you're just stopped right there. We've actually this year been paying for students in our Uni Ready programs to make sure that they can put the application in when mum and dad don't have that money, and Curtin are paying us back for that. But it just staggers me that we think we want more equity students in, and straight away we put a barrier there. We really need to be flexible with entry. The regional unis are much, much, much better at being flexible with entry and recognising prior learning, whether it's from vet or work experience or whatever. So that's really, really important. We couldn't build cohorts that we have and to be able to produce the teaching and nursing students and things that we've been able to do if we were trying to tell them all that they had to have 70 plus ATARs and everything to get in. We just wouldn't maintain a cohort. A third of our students come through TAFE, and another quarter through the bridging programs. And we really need to decentralise and personalise as much as possible. I know that's really difficult. It's easy for me to say with 300 students. I know if you've got 30,000 or more, that's a really difficult thing to do. But my staff spend more time than anything helping people to understand what they need to do to apply or enrol or whatever. So we need to be able to personalise that. We need to get the terminology as simple as possible and be very clear what we're asking for, and not ask for stuff that we don't really need either. So my final point would be that if you're already feeling that maybe you don't belong in the space, it actually doesn't take very much to decide not to go ahead. So we really need to keep on being real and put ourselves in the shoe of the student that we're thinking that we're aiming for. It's just really important that we get it right.
Thank you so much for those insights. I think there'll be a lot of questions, I think, as we go. But Tim, really keen to hear your experience as a regional student and what you think works in higher ed.
Thank you, Kylie. I've prepared a bit of a speech. I won't be quite as laid back as the other two speakers, so bear with me. Equity, capital and support that is assisted by the higher education system and regional tertiary study hubs is what is needed for improving regional student outcomes. Please let me explain this statement. Firstly, I'll explain what I mean by equity, capital and support, and secondly, bring in my personal experience of using a regional university study hub. Equality is where you get an equal share, but equity is where you get what you need. Regional university study hubs that provide less dislocation and upheaval via equity will allow students from regional backgrounds to successfully attain higher educational qualifications. Students who do not have to relocate, have secure and stable internet, and suitable study areas close to home will gain that suitable study environment. As well, if the educational provider has supportive programs and understands the positive impacts on students, in having equitable outcomes will attract students to tertiary study and their institution. The federal government's initiative to provide income support for work placement for several programs is a key step in the right direction, as costs to study as well as relocation costs can be a barrier to attaining tertiary education. Not only fiscal capital but social capital plays a role in a regional student's decision to go on to further study. The cost of moving, then finding income, and the cost of living are often prohibited for students to progress to further study. A regional university study hub that allows prospective students to stay in their regional area and will allow them maybe to stay in their family unit or their kin network. Social dislocation can lead to a loss of connections to friends, family and values, which can cause mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, and cause students not to pursue or even drop out of tertiary study. Also, cultural capital plays an important aspect in an individual's decision in pursuing further study. Regional, country, Indigenous cultures shape an individual and may not combine well in an urban centre, and in fact, we, Australia, may face a loss of culture and cultural capital if everyone urbanises. Regional university study hubs in regional Australia will bring employment and benefits to that community. Understanding and support is paramount to getting people to go on to further study and stay and study. A system that is supportive to student needs from secondary study and the many paths students can take and go in gaining tertiary qualifications will make life easier for students. From regional careers advisors, student wellbeing officers, mentors, supportive universities and supportive governments will be better tuned to students' needs and giving them support. Needs-based funding can help in providing academic and other supports for regional students. Awareness campaigns to the regional community about the benefits of local tertiary study will make this demographic more aware of a local supportive place in which to pursue further study. My journey as a student in a regional university study hub found that the above points were gained and demonstrated, which allowed me to complete my degree after a prolonged leave of absence due to illness. My university provider and regional university study hub offered me a supportive environment, understanding and equity, which allowed me to complete my degree. I did not have a suitable study area where I was staying, and I did not have a stable or secure internet. Plus, I did not want to move away from my regional area, as I had my support work locally and a lot of social capital, which was important to my recovery. Also, my regional university study hub had wellness officers who would touch base frequently, and they had a person with postgrad qualifications who could proofread my assignments and give general feedback. Plus, they understood the need for me to finish my degree by staying locally and were sensitive to my condition. My goals went from just passing my degree to gaining a master's degree with distinction. I could not have achieved this without the support of my regional university study hub and my supportive university lecturers. Giving regional students equitable status and that will keep them which will keep their financial and social capital will help them to decide to pursue further tertiary study. An understanding and supportive education system will allow both providers and prospective students on the needs and solutions for improving tertiary education for people from regional backgrounds. Regional university study hubs will reduce the fiscal and social costs for the students and the community. From my study experience, if I did not have a regional university study hub, supportive lecturers, maintenance of capital, equitable access to resources and understanding supports, I may not have attained my postgrad qualifications. And simply, I'm not alone. Thank you, Kylie.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for sharing your journey and some really valuable insights from a student perspective. I'm sure there'll be some questions from the audience shortly. Over to you, Alec.
Thanks so much, Kylie. Now, for those of you who know me, my primary role is an advocate. And for those of you who don't know what an advocate is, I represent 7 regionally based universities. So I spend my days walking the fancy halls of Parliament House and the less fancy halls of the Department of Education, talking to policymakers and parliamentarians about this very matter, what works for regional students and what improves their outcomes, to not only raise awareness, but also to hopefully see changes in policy that make real impact. So I like to think of it as a bit of a toolbox. And so what is in the toolbox for regional student outcomes? Now, this comment would have been much better if Fiona was here, but I believe she is watching online. Fiona Nash is an incredibly useful part of that toolbox. Fiona Nash, as the Regional Education Commissioner, champions regional education, regional institutions, and regional communities. And that's for the entire life journey, from access to early education, through primary school, secondary school, that transition into tertiary, and then obviously into the workplace after that. And it's important that we recognise and celebrate the creation of this role, because this is a bipartisan champion. It has support. There was a role created under the formal coalition government that has then been renewed and supported by the Labor government. And I think that we need, all of us in this room, to not only support Fiona and her team in the role, but also provide and cement to our policymakers that this role is vital to celebrating the student and also the institutions. Because I do get the privilege of talking to ministers and policymakers about what works, I would say the key thing that needs to happen is data. we need a complete reform to the national data collection system so we can just go to parliamentarians and say, this is the evidence that is here. Goodwill and gut feel is not going to influence policy anymore, if it ever did. And when you think about what that means, it's not only at the program level, we need to have programs that are designed with data collection and reporting in mind at the outset, but also how do we do this at a collective national level? How are we tracking outcomes, for instance, for students at regional schools that are receiving visits from university outreach and access teams? Do we know that these make a difference, and how are we tracking them through that system? Because without knowing that, we're never going to be able to see what works and what doesn't work. And we're heading, unfortunately, into an increased area of an era of accountability and government expectations upon institutions to acquit and account for how they spend scarce taxpayer funds. Now, all of that doesn't sound cheap. I'm fully aware of that. But it's going to be essential for everyone in this room to think about that aspect of what works and what doesn't work. Because if we don't know what isn't working, how are we going to be able to continue to do it? The final point I would make, and it was great to hear the Minister speak earlier today about his plans for needs-based funding and managed growth. But Australia also has probably the world's leading income contingent loan system. This removes the barrier of study, the barrier of cost to come and study. But we know from the Regional Universities Network that the primary reason that students from a regional background drop out of study is because they just don't have the money to live, the money to survive, that upfront cost of, oh no, I need to buy a new computer. So we've removed the barrier for cost to study in terms of what the subject costs, but we need an overwhelming reform to the social security mechanisms in Australia that support students, particularly from equity and regional backgrounds, to succeed at university.
Thank you. So I'm just, in terms of what works for regional student outcomes, I'm going to kind of play back to you all a little bit about what I heard, and I'm going to add a few dot points in of my own, if that's all right. So one of the things that I heard was student choice. In terms of what works in terms of regional access, regional, rural and remote student access to higher education, it's about student choice. How do we balance that challenge between should I stay or should I go? And how do we support students to have really meaningful opportunities to study education in their community? So that was the first thing that I really heard. And how do we support individual dreams and not institutional priorities? That was one of the big things and you can feel free to disagree with me as well. The other thing that I heard in terms of what works for regional, rural and remote higher education is, Chris, you said this, online, quality online education is so important to achieving that, but also not always doing it in the same way that we have. Being innovative and exploring different products like the Curiosity courses and things like that are really important in servicing regional communities. The other thing that came through quite strongly as well was the idea of support in place matters. And that came through in a couple of different ways. Tim, you talked a lot about the village around you and the network around you and the support around you to be able to, study in a regional community. But also being quite creative in terms of, even if we are providing education online, what support could occur in community to support regional, rural and remote students to pay that, to participate in higher education in a way that is much easier. So whether it's placement in community, whether it's, safe study spaces, whether it's creating those networks to really create that sense of belonging, that came through really strongly. Outreach and widening participation in regional, rural and remote communities I thought came through as a really key theme as well. So thinking about higher education early, how do we ensure that every student across Australia has access to that kind of career education and those kinds of conversations as well, and really to support those students not only in accessing higher ed but also transitioning into higher education as well. A couple of other things that I just wanted to add on to that is that when we understand what works in regional, rural and remote communities is actually that those things are actually community-led. That whatever is being designed, whatever data we look at in terms of what student needs are, that the decisions around what is the best outcomes for students in those communities should be made by those communities. And finally, picking up on your point, Alex, around a champion for regional education, absolutely, that's great to have Fiona in that regional commissioner role, but I'd also challenge that actually we should all be champions for regional education. And we've all got every single person in this room, every single higher education leader in Australia has got a role to play in terms of championing regional higher education and creating university spaces and pathways and products and choices that really listen to the needs of the communities as well. So that's a bit of what I heard. Ian, you put me in charge of the panel and you gave me a list of questions, but am I allowed to go off script? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, excellent. I've got the microphone, so he's got no choice. We talk a lot about the challenges that regional, rural and the remote students have in accessing higher education. It's such a deficit conversation, I feel. And so I want to pose a different question to the panel. What value, and I think I want us to think about this we're in a context at the moment where universities and the quality and the concept of higher education, we kind of heard earlier, is a little bit under fire. So I want to take the opportunity, let's flip the narrative, right? What value do regional, rural and remote students bring to our higher education system? But equally, what value does higher ed bring to our communities? I don't know if any of you have got a view on that.
I obviously don't work inside an individual institution, but I am lucky enough to speak to vice-chancellors, executives, staff, students across the range of universities. What I would say is, I agree with you, right? We always talk about the challenges, and we probably don't celebrate the successes enough. Individual successes are great, and we all love that one student that's gone through that transformation of, someone who didn't believe they could go to university, who's then accessed it, succeeded, and is now thriving. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that individual stories are just that, they're individuals. So we need systemic changes to celebrate broad success across the sector. What just works, at the University of New England is great, but can that be replicated across the sector? And so where we find examples of that, and I believe ACSES has a very important role to play in helping sell those stories, that will have real impact for what we do. I would also go a bit further in changing that mindset, right? Because we're all practitioners and we all say, wouldn't it be great if we had more money to do what we could do? But quite often our view of how we get that money to do that is very limited and narrow. So I would put the challenge back to everyone here to think about, well, how can you leverage what you're doing? How can you get engagement from your communities? So we're based here in downtown Sydney. It's a great location. If UTS disappeared, would the community really notice? If the University of New England disappeared, I guarantee you everyone in Armidale would know about it. So regional universities are core to their communities. They're often the largest employer. They're often the largest supplier of trained workforce into their communities. And so what do we bring? We bring the opportunity to train not only the workers of today, but also the workforce of tomorrow, where you can do it in country, in place. And so by doing that and by acknowledging that, then the opportunity is, well, what can we all do to partner with our community to increase the initiatives that we have in place to increase opportunity?
Thanks. Natalie, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say what regional communities can bring to higher education. So regional communities can offer facilities, they can offer expertise, they can offer a whole pile of interesting placements. So there are lots of things that can be sort of challenged, and if we're talking about the financial models or things like that, well, actually sometimes things can be done quite cheaply if you're just actually listening to the people in the regions that know what some of those ready-made labs are. You know, people say, well, you couldn't do that because you haven't got this lab. And you go, well, actually, you know, this mining company actually invested in this really top-notch science lab. It's actually based at one of the high schools, and we use that all the time. You know, so there are things that regional communities can bring to the table too. And then, of course, when you are training your local people and they're going and they're doing pracs in local schools, we've actually had a study done by Central Queensland Uni because we run their education program. And one of the things that the schools were saying was that, you know, our students, when they graduate and they start teaching there, would hit the ground running because they're absolutely in context already. They know the regional community, they know the types of students they're going to get, they know some of those thorny issues that present. And so that ability to get you know, graduates that are already contextually ready for where they are is another thing that perhaps those regional students bring into the argument.
Chris,
I just feel like there's so many answers. One of the things that's right, I've only been living in the community for 2 years, so I haven't even made blow-in status yet, let alone any kind of local status. 35 years gets you to the first base of local status in an Australian country town. Perhaps it's the same around the world. But one thing that I had to start doing fairly soon after I arrived, when I was talking to someone, whether it was about an opportunity or an issue that I had to manage, is to either ask them or someone else who they're connected to. And it's not a question that you would ask very often in a city context or in a city university, because they're not just connected as in, well, we have dinner every now and then, or we go out for a drink, or we go to the footy. They're like all married to each other for multiple generations, across big networks of the region. And the other thing that's interesting about having a long-running university in the community is you have a very high level of bachelor's education and postgraduate education. So you have a very high percentage close to the university, the sort of issues we're talking about from the point of view of people being at distant and more remote. They're in the surrounding regions and in the towns of the surrounding regions where you start to move hundreds to thousands of kilometres. Harleen, I'm not sure if she's here. I've got a very good student population from the wheat belt of Western Australia, and apparently I always have had, I shouldn't personalise that, the University of New England has had, I just signed stuff. So I think that the fabric of community and the fabric of the university being completely intertwined is something that is brought by being in the community. Armidale has another remarkable thing that sort of pops out you wouldn't expect, which is I think it has Australia's highest youth involvement in music. And you think, well, what does that bring? Well, where do you think all those people go to try to become musicians? They don't stay in Armidale, they come back and visit. But they come down here to enrich the cities of Australia. I mean, I have a view, you'll have a different view because you all come from the city. I'm from the bush now. I believe the essence of the Australian culture, what makes us Australian, is that rural Australian culture. Some people believe it's from war, and maybe that's because so many young males in particular came from rural Australia to go and fight in the war, so the Anzac tradition. I think it really is a very deep part of Australian culture. So I think when people are coming from regional Australia and they're studying in metropolitan universities, I mean, on the one hand, I'm discouraging that because you should just leave them alone and let them get a proper education. But they're really bringing a different perspective. You heard in some of our students this morning, it's not just Indigenous Australians, it's people who are fundamentally connected to primary production, and they come from soil and water and land and the reality of family life connected into small community. And they bring that when they come, if you're prepared to find it. The young chap from Goulburn this morning was giving really clear signals of finding community and being part of community in the city. You read that one way as being, well, here's a lost person sort of in the city, but if you read it the other way around, the wonderful opportunity for the others that he would interact with. I think the nation also needs to have an educated rural population because the supply of goods and services that we depend on, and increasingly the supply of energy and goods and services, if we want to have sovereign capability, if we want to have people who can survive as businesses and thrive in rural Australia, they need tertiary education to do that, with mechanisation, with gigantism, with massive changes coming through the economies of where we produce the food that we don't export and the food that we don't import. And it's a significant part of Australian culture is to get access to fresh food. A significant part of our economy to have import and export as well. If we want to continue to have that benefit and to be that economy, I mean, you could almost imagine a situation at the extreme where we hand food to somewhere else around the world because it's cheaper to import it because we didn't get educated and move forward in our ability to produce our own food. And you think, well, that's ridiculous. But where does all our manufactured goods come from today? Well, it comes from another country that we exported the desire because the import was cheap. And we certainly don't produce all of our food. So I think that's a very simple example of where the benefit to the whole nation as a result of a well-educated rural population is on your plate every day.
Thank you, Chris.
I never thought of that before. I'm going to use that again.
So there's some really amazing questions by the audience. So we might jump there if that's okay. And I think, Chris, you might have gotten people talking because there's a few things in here that I might go to you on the first one for, if that's okay. So I'll read the questions as are, and we've got a lot of anonymous here. So I think people feel free to put your name behind things.
It's easy to upset Mr. and Mrs. Anonymous.
Yes. So the comment is, I agree we should have differentiation and not all universities should be the same, but shouldn't students from all backgrounds be represented in all institutions?
I think they will be. I think there's a diffusion thing and a selection thing there. Remember my job description, I'll just be careful here, but city universities do a lot of damage to city kids as well, and we look after them when they come back out. They come out, they find UNE, or they come out and find another bush university where they can spend 3 or 4 years in a very different environment, in a calmer environment. There are a lot of mental stress issues for young people. We all know that. It's not necessarily a mental stress-free zone, rural Australia, we know that, but it does work very well. And we have quite a few young students, in particular in the school leaver, from Brisbane and Sydney, who have often spent a year in university here. And I don't think there's any shortage of rural and remote students coming into the city. The question of the sample of that is, I think, a pretty interesting one. I think sampling the top ATAR students from the private schools around regional and rural Australia is perhaps not the strategy you would use if you wanted the answer to that question to be yes.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting point that you make as well in terms of that kind of second chance at higher ed, because I was actually having a look at some data the other day, and I was, students who leave kind of, city-based universities, that there is a high articulation of those students going to other universities. But when a student leaves a regional university, often we've lost them from the sector, right? And so I think regional universities have a really, really important role to play in not only increasing access, but retaining students for the whole sector as well.
Our retention rate of school leavers is very high. Our retention rate of, if you like, the open access gateway is much, much lower. It's much tougher to keep people who are working and have families and who are remote. They're holding on to one unit. When they lose that last unit, then they're gone, and it's very hard to get them back. We have, I think, about 40% of a very large number, I won't quote the number, of students who haven't completed Bachelor of Arts who have one unit to go. and we can't encourage them to come back and finish one unit to get that bachelor's. They just switch off. It's like, no, it's not relevant anymore, I got the job, or whatever happened in life. And they're quite adamant about it because we'd ring them all up because we want them to complete, even if it's 7 or 10 years later. And they do take a lot longer to complete. That's another thing perhaps about data and statistics, that the people who are working and have families, they take longer to finish a degree. Would you believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. Alec, did you want to?
Yeah, just quickly. I take the point of the question, Kylie, but what I'd also say is it requires a cultural mindset shift for those universities that have traditionally said, we don't want those students. We only want the elite kids to come to our institution, and we'll say no to everybody else. If we want those universities to also be doing more to educate equity students, it's not good enough just to simply chase a pot of money because now there's extra loading attached to those students, but to actually fundamentally change the mindset that says university is for everybody, not just a select handful of people that come from private schools.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question from the audience, and a huge thank you to Ryan Naylor for this one. This is to you, Natalie, actually, directly. So if a university wanted to engage better with a regional university study hub, how should they go about it? And how flexible is the relationship to help us better reach community?
Okay, well, it would always start with a conversation. Ideally, you come and visit. But it always just does start with a conversation to see whether you're genuinely interested. I just take Alex's point about mindsets and mind shifts, because often there can be a lot of keenness in one area of the university. It doesn't transfer across the rest, and conversations don't go anywhere. Because we've had a lot of conversations like that, and a lot of project work that sort of leads to part way there and not getting there in the end. So yes, the simple answer is starting with the conversation. I know sort of from my perspective, I'm pretty sure Chris would probably be the same. We're always open for a conversation from a university to talk about how we can work better together and whether there might be opportunities that can come out of that for the regional students where we are.
And I think just to kind of put a slightly different spin on that question, Tim, I'm going to ask you, being a participant in a regional university study hub, I know we've got some students in the room today, how did you kind of make that first contact? What did that look like for you?
Well, my first contact with Taree University's campus was actually through refer a friend. I didn't even know it existed. Simply, I didn't know. I wasn't in that sphere, even though I was on leave of absences. I didn't know it existed, and I was tossing up whether to go on to further study, and a friend told me, they said, why don't you try TUC? And I looked at him and said, well, what's TUC? And so I went to the library, Googled, and shot off an email, and went in and met Donna, Evan and Gemma, and went from there. And it's been a positive experience ever since. So it went from the conversation very much, and what are your goals? And mine was, I just want to, please make degrees. That was my mentality. I've got to get there, I've got to pass. That was my goal. And put it simply, then when I really got back into I think they even said I got my groove back on, which I didn't really know I had a groove, but I got in there and was able to do exceptionally well. So I think, and meritocracy, adding it to an earlier question, is I know there's money associated, but some students do have life outside of study, and if you've got demanding kids or work or whatever, sometimes getting the assignment in is half the battle. And that's where a supportive university can help a lot of students.
I think, look, Tim, I think anyone who's met Gemma and Evan from the Taree University Centre, once you went in there, they've got you. Like, they're such amazing people that, you would be sold for life, I'd imagine. So, and very well supported.
What a great start to ask what your objective is, what your goal is. I think that's perfect. That's what we should ask all students straight up. What do you aspire to? What's your dream?
How do we help you get there? Yeah. There's another great question here from Hannah, actually, and particularly I think this one's really topical given the current discussions around, the tertiary harmonisation agenda. And so the question is, what opportunity do study hubs provide for students who might want to take vet courses as well? So what is the role of rushes in both the higher ed but also the vocational space?
And that really depends on the location, but most study hubs will be helping people through vet courses if there's not, a strong vet provider in the region. In our case, we've actually got a really fantastic TAFE that is actually just down a physical path to us, so our students use that TAFE cafeteria. We're not co-located in the sense that there's still two distinct campuses, but there's a physical pathway between us, and then we have an articulated pathway between all of their diploma courses into the courses that we're supporting at GUC. And I think I said in passing before, a third of our students come through TAFE pathways, so it is vital to us in forming cohorts in those bigger communities that can, that we're facilitating those pathways. But it's certainly the case that that a lot of the regional university study hubs are supporting vet students as well.
Great. Okay, there's another question here specifically for UNE. There was a question specifically around how does RPL, so recognition of prior learning, operate at UNE? And given your experience around that, what needs to change at other universities to support that?
So as I mentioned quickly earlier, we have very few admissions in the university via an ATAR pathway. So pretty much every student is admitted on a bespoke basis. So the answer, in a sense, here is brute force. That I have a wonderful admissions team, and they look at each person, and their attitude is, how do I find an opportunity to offer this applicant? That's their. They'll spend 48 or 72 hours on one application if they need to. We're trying to get them to prioritise a little bit themselves, because there might be another 50 students they don't get to. But that's the essence that sits in the admissions team. So every application is a potential offer. So it's how do you find a way to offer somebody something, not how do you find a way to exclude it to numbers. That's the way it's been done for so long. I think I was going to try to get through the panel without mentioning artificial intelligence, but it seems to have popped up in my head here, which is that if you think there's an extension of what I was talking about, I didn't detail it there, but there is an extension of what I talked about there of curiosity courses. And essentially, if you implement something like this into an artificial intelligence platform, if you think of the tutoring environment that we're getting, and I won't go through the complexities of it, but the AI tutoring environment is a terrific environment for finding out what someone knows, as opposed to teaching them, and then to engage them further in learning as a result of that. So I'm pretty confident that quite a lot of what we currently call RPL could actually be a friction-free entry and inquiry. Now, how much time would you need to assure yourself, if you're thinking in conventional units, of whether someone has or hasn't met the requirements of a unit? And that comes down to that much bigger discussion we're having as a sector at the moment on how do you do assessment in the age of artificial intelligence at a course level. That's what the Higher Education Standards Framework requires of us. And we do have the Chief Commissioner in the room, so we always have to make sure that we're mentioning the Higher Education Standards Framework if we say artificial intelligence in a sentence, don't we, Chief Commissioner? But it is an incredibly important shift that we're all thinking through as institutions at the moment, the difference between the kind of unit level scoring of somebody and then this assurance that someone who's holding a degree with a particular name has the capabilities that assures that they have that degree. So for me, there's a very interesting window of opportunity in here for us to begin to educate the artificial intelligence platforms. So this is not just your standard large language model, because they're not able to do that without a lot of additional support and instruction. So I think there's a great opportunity there, and we will be trialling that as soon as we can with our admissions team as a formal test to see the difference between what an admissions team might do to open those gates and, as I say, find a way to make an offer, as opposed to try to minimise the number of wrong decisions. I wanted to mention something else, if I could, because that just triggers a completely different question that I could ask myself and answer it, which I wanted to touch on early offers, and I meant to answer your question before about what kind of regional students might bring. I don't know how many school children go through your campuses, probably a lot, but they're big places and you probably don't see them very often. I see the school children who go through my campus as a Vice-Chancellor, and I greet them at all ages from about year 3, 4, 5 through to year 12. And I sit on the floor with the year 5s and I say, you all have a place in this university. I'm not allowed to tell you that formally, because I'm not allowed to do that until the 1st of September when you're finished year 12. But if anyone tells you you don't have a place in this university, my email is vc@une.edu.au, and you let me know. And some of them have. So some of the kids have sent me emails saying, how do I make sure I get that place? So I've got them tagged, I've got those kids tagged. I just have to keep my job long enough so that the year 5s can make it to year 12. But it is another important part of, if you're in the community and getting that expectation, is the younger the children are that are normalised into university. And I think that's quite a harder call here in the big metropolitans. Sorry, that was me asking myself a question. That's a bit presumptuous.
You must have just read my mind in a way, Chris, because one of the next questions that's been asked by Ben actually really, there's really strong alignment here around how do you start having those conversations with kids earlier, but also the challenges around career advice in regional, rural and the remote schools. And I just wondered if anyone wanted to make a comment on that.
I'll go very quickly on one, because it's another point that I wanted to make sure was in the room before I left, and that is we have a male problem. Like, we've got a lot of male problems in our society, but we have a slightly different one in regional and rural Australia. So 85% of my students are online. That's 15% school leavers. 80% of my 85% are female, and greater than 50% of my 15% are female. So we have a male issue, or a demographic male issue, or either that or the males are all attracted into the other environments. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a very specific set of reasons why we're seeing that demographic over time, and the way the university goes about its care programs. But it does come to your point that let's use a stereotype here, but if the game is that you come and work on the farm, then it's much more likely that a daughter is sent away from the farm and a son is kept on the farm, and the what I call the kitchen table conversation about university can be very gendered, in a positive way for females, but then that demographic over time is becoming quite concerning for us. And I'll tell you, a very interesting and unexpected outcome of that is that some of the cultural challenges we have of behaviour in our colleges are female-driven, not male-driven. So a lot of the stereotypes that would come out of things like gender-based violence and how to manage those things are quite a lot more complex to deal with than I would have expected.
Yeah. What about the rest of the panel? Role of career advisors in regional, rural and remote areas. I'm gonna let Tim go first, if that's right.
Hugely important. Well, my most recent study, careers advisor, is actually here in the audience, so I've got to give him a rap anyway. So if you want a career or study advice, just see Ben Archer in the top right-hand corner there. He'll set you in the right direction. It was
Ben that asked the question. I feel like it's...
No, hugely important. Ben was one of the guys at Taree University's campus after I met Donna, Gemma and Evan. I had a chat with. It was a couple of weeks later when he was up in Taree next, and we just had a conversation, and I explained my situation, what I was needing, and he said, well, this is what you can do. Have you approached the university? Yes, done all those little things. And all the way through, he was touching base, which was hugely important, like tracking me how I went, what do you want to do? And now it's turned into not just, well, I said it before and got a couple of P's make degrees mentality to get my degree, to actually graduating with distinction. And now the feedback I'm getting now from my support network is, well, why not look at a research higher degree? So that's where I'm at the moment. And Ben's role, and I think other careers advisors and study advisors, is not just study, it's actually what you can do in, well, the working world, if I can use that expression for a lack of a better one. What can you get employed as? Is your degree going to get you with? And Ben has actually, or just last week, actually sent me an email about actually I got an email and Ben went through it with me about possible actual jobs that might be suited for with my master's degree actually in my local area, which was quite refreshing. He was able to give that advice. And for people in regional communities, having an independent, regionally based career study advisor is hugely important, because I believe the secondary school children are being serviced by careers advisors, but I think they might be under the pump.
Look, I think what you've really drawn on there is like the value and the impact of that personalised, that information that's so relevant to you. So maybe a huge round of applause for Ben, like I think, yeah.
I'll be a bit biased and give a round of applause to TUC as well, because they helped me quite a bit. So,
Yeah.
Kylie, can I just talk about that question sort of at that school level? What's really useful, I think, is the relationship that I touched on that we've had with Curtin over the last few years. They gave us access to their, evidence-based program that we could then go and deliver out into the schools. But then we've been able to feed back to that and go, you know what, some of this bit's not really relevant to our lot, or the way you're putting it, it really, that doesn't really cut it with our students. And so then we've been able to work together to make some changes and to make things more regionally relevant. And we're now just starting on a project where we're actually looking at making it more culturally safe and appropriate for our Aboriginal students and our Aboriginal engagement programs. So we're working on that at the moment too. So when you can get some good partnerships going in that space, you can really help grow the relevance of that career design type stuff that you can do with school kids as they're going through. And because our staff will be around, all the time, we can be forming those relationships with the students in the local schools and see them again the following year and the following year and the following year as well.
Okay, I'll get in trouble off Ian when I get off the stage, but last kind of rogue question to wrap you all up for the panel. Minister Clare talked a bit earlier this morning around, the key things that he's going to put through next year. So I'm curious, if each of you were Minister Clare and you got to pick one thing that you would do to improve outcomes for regional students in Australia, what piece of legislation would you pass that would make a big difference?
That's your job. I'm very keen to know what Alec says.
I think there's more than one piece of legislation.
You only get one. You only get one.
Kerry Lee's sitting here. I would enshrine the powers of a proportionate risk-based regulator forever and ever and ever into legislation. But for regional students, I think what's coming out of the Accord has positive signs, and it has all of the positive intentions around what the Minister wants to achieve. The key thing that often gets lost is the implementation of that will. And so when we think about what has happened in the past, where legislation has been introduced and then guidelines are drawn up by a public servant who's never set foot outside of ANU and Marcus Clark Street in Canberra, what you then discover is there are a whole lot of unintended consequences, because the reality of a regional community, a regional student, a regional university is so fundamentally different to what occurs there. So I'm not answering your question as to what bit of specific legislation, because I'm very keen to see the legislation the Minister's proposing. The key thing is going to be how is it implemented to actually change and improve outcomes for regional students.
Great. Tim, what do you think?
I'm just looking at the question down here, what works for regional student outcomes? And just in my experience was the RUSH framework, so the regional university study hubs. That worked for me, and it's working for a lot of university and TAFE students at Taree. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I know if you're talking to Evan that TAFE students use the centre as well. So it's made a big change for me, and there's a lot of other students who I've talked to who are teaching, nursing students. Some are doing their PhDs and through TUC, and some are actually, one's actually just finished, and they've all found it a very supportive environment. So if we want to improve what's working for regional student outcomes, I can only use my experience, and I have to say the RUSH, and I'm not aware of the CUC framework, so I apologise if I'm not saying CUC because I'm not aware of your network, but the RUSH framework in Taree, something similar would, for my opinion, would work.
Thank you.
I want to be selfish and say to make sure that there'll be a policy environment where, you know, WA and South Australia sort of aren't forgotten in the whole regional thing. But I'm not going to be selfish and say that.
I think that was a cheeky way of getting two in, Natalie.
It was a
But
cheeky
anyway,
way of getting two in. I really think that on the whole student equity thing, if you can't afford to do it, you can't afford to do it. And so the most important thing you can do is actually make the accessibility of study payments for students greater, and that you can live with that without going into poverty.
So regional Australia is well known for its independence and can do the future. So the 10 most important things that he should do, we're going to do it ourselves. So the one that's left over for me, the outcome that is missing, I think, for a lot of regional students, for regional universities, is high quality infrastructure. It's been a long time since we've had infrastructure investment. And the question of the amount of time someone would spend as a student on campus and what their experience is when they're on the campus, it's a bit intractable for us at the moment. We can see our way through almost every other component of learning the technology environment and the research environment, but the legacy infrastructure debt that we have as a result of big investment through 1960s, 70s and 80s, that's an impossible hill for us to climb on our own. So a regional infrastructure, higher education infrastructure fund would certainly be very high on my list, and connected to regional development infrastructure, not to disconnect the university from other regional development infrastructure priorities.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the panel today. So can we give a huge thank you to our guests?